Elizabeth, how would you describe how John got information from politicians and newsmakers?
Well, again, it was his preparation. He knew the questions he wanted to ask because he'd spent so much time studying their records, studying their career, and he also had the sense for what the news of the day was. And so he just went right after the, you know, that nut that explains people too. It wasn't just the facts. It was also the framework that and the psychological framework that explained these people. And I mean, you would often ask, for instance, about people's parents. You know, what was your relationship like with your mother? What was the relationship like with your father? And that got a lot of information that you don't usually hear from a politician.
But he got resistance too. I mean, he did that with Tim Russert. Tim Russert's right. You know, Tim Russert, premier interviewer, is writing his book Big Russ about his dad. Callaway goes, well, you don't mention much about your mom. And you could see Russert's face change because he didn't want to. And so, and I believe John did the double back interview method.
What do you mean by that?
He'd ask you, and then you'd resist. And so he'd give you a little rope to talk about something else, and then he'd double back in and go, back to your mother here for a minute. And Russert resisted it. He did it with Walter Jacobson, and I saw Walter's face change. Jimmy Carter, he nailed on some other stuff in that interview, and Carter, who loved that part of the interview, didn't love the rest of it when he was challenging him on what Carter had written about the Palestinians and the Israeli state.
And John would have spent time reading what Carter wrote about the Palestinians and what was happening in the Middle East.
You read more Carter than Rosalind read.
Rich, I remember once John did an interview with Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger was talking about his book, which was roughly just a little more than 1,100 pages long. I did the setup piece, and I just read excerpts from the book. And afterwards I said, John, I can't believe you read that whole book, because parts of it were pretty dry. And John looked at me with this expression on his face, and he said, I wouldn't dare interview Dr. Kissinger without having read every word. His preparation was legendary.
Yeah, I don't think that John ever slept. I think he
You're
was
kidding, but it's,
he really didn't sleep.
He really didn't.
No, I mean,
get by in a couple hours a night.
You know, I mean, who else could sit up from 11 to midnight on a Sunday night and talk about the implementation of the English Mass? I think the level of his preparation required that he do that, and I think also that fundamentally he was a night person, but a day person as well. And just a person who could get by on very little, if any kind of.
Well, you know, as a matter of fact, we're joking about it, but the truth is that he would typically stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning, go to sleep at about 5 in the morning, and wake up at about 10 in the morning. So, Joel, you're right. You weren't kidding.
No.
He honestly had this issue, and it was not altogether a very healthy way to live.
And I think, although he articulated it in different ways and not as I will, that, you know, since he had dropped out of school, he really wanted to show that it wasn't just a degree that counted, that you could develop yourself and get a true education. And he was always trying to educate himself. And, you know, being on the other side of one of his interviews is quite an experience. When we had our 30th anniversary for the Week in Review, which incidentally he helped craft and found, you know, you're sitting there and you've known the guy forever, and all of a sudden he's asking you questions that you never thought were going to be coming out of his mouth. I mean, he was just superb at bringing you into areas that you never intended to go. And I really believe that unlike some of the others of us in journalism, where we just want to play gotcha or make sure we have the facts straight, he wanted to know how these people felt about the things that they did. And I think it came out.
Elizabeth, you were the subject of a John Callaway interview. What was it like?
Well, first of all, I was really terrified.
And you've known him for
and
decades.
I've known him for years. And I thought, I'm going to be interviewed by John Callaway. First of all, it was strange to be the interviewee instead of the interviewer. This is in connection with the book you wrote about Rod Blagojevich, which just came out recently. Which just came out. And so I was really pretty nervous. But it was such a wonderful experience. And I'm actually so glad that I had that chance to be interviewed by John Callaway. It's probably one of the last interviews that he did, because he creates this atmosphere in an interview that you feel safe and you feel it's just a warm, inviting atmosphere, even when he's asking a tough question. You know he wants the answer, and you're very willing to give it to him because of the way he set up the interview. And the questions he asked, I mean, I tried to prepare for it. I think, now what is he going to ask? Well, of course, I didn't get it right at all. But it was it was just interesting to be on the other side.
It was a workout. Mark Sapelsa, who's an anchor whom I love and is a dear friend, was interviewed by Callaway, and I watched it, and I thought, Sapelsa's top lip is sweating, and he's trying to finesse Callaway. He doesn't want to talk about, you know, his family. Mark's a very private person, and you know, and Callaway kept probing, and Mark who is such a good journalist, was trying to find a way to bail out. And I called him later and I said, "You tried to out Callaway. What were you thinking?" And Sapelsa said, "Oh God, it's killing me. You know, I'm dying in here because I did. I tried to outsmart Callaway, and you couldn't."
I knew that wasn't going to happen. That was not the way I approached that interview.
I wasn't exactly ready for when he asked me if I was a religious man. I mean, it was the last thing in the world I thought.
That's a very typical question from John, in that he attempts to explore another dimension of an interviewee in a way which illuminates the entire interview. And Rich, one of the things that the underlying theme that we've been talking about in his interviewing style and so forth is his extreme and highly developed sense of curiosity about the world.
Well, I think if you listen to that one soundbite near the end of the little piece that I did, where he talks about all these things that seem to be rather mundane, but all put together, he says it's part of the human condition, you know. And so there's this sort of this element that really transcends just the little day-to-day things of our lives, and we're all in some much larger game together, whatever it may be.
But this is, you know, we make him sound like he's just a tower of intellectual strength, which he was, but he's the kind of guy who just loves to go have a drink with or a cup of coffee, and he could regale you with stories. You could laugh all night away. And it was a terrific raconteur, but it wasn't just planned. It was all these things that would happen. He just had a very, very quick wit.
But I think it was that intellectual curiosity that made John who he was.
That was his fuel.
That really was. And it was interesting because Robert McNeil had that exact same kind of intellectual curiosity, that he just wanted to know. You know, how the world worked and why these decisions were made and what made people tick.
As Rich said, he wanted to understand the human condition.
And it was so similar to Robin that that always struck me about the two. They were such good journalists and such good interviewers.
Well, during his long career, John mentored many young journalists. He also enjoyed engaging fellow reporters and interviewers in lively conversation.